Well, hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to your Wednesday. It is June the 26th. We've got a lot to talk about this time around. We know we started the week thinking that it was going to be a fairly quiet week, but Mother Nature always has a different plan up her sleeve. And we're going to talk about a couple of tropical disturbances that are already out there and how they could be affecting parts of the Caribbean as well as portions of the Gulf of Mexico. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to look at our traffic cameras here just to kind of look at the skies. We've got a little extra cloud cover out there, and we've seen some widely scattered showers and thunderstorms, and just generally some pop-up showers and thunderstorms are out there here this morning. And there they go. You can see that just kind of a scattering of those afternoon showers and thunderstorms starting to fire up. There is a pretty good line of storms, though, coming out of southern Oklahoma and Arkansas that we'll be watching overnight tonight that could bring us a better chance for some rain, perhaps late tonight or very, very early tomorrow morning. So let's go ahead and get started when it comes to our tropical weather, and we'll go ahead and look at the Gulf of Mexico, where we're really not seeing a whole lot happening right now. A little bit of shower and thunderstorm activity down here over the southern part of the Bay of Campeche. That is a part of a very broad area of low pressure that covers much of Central America this time around. And there's been some fairly hefty rains over Nicaragua, Honduras, back toward El Salvador, and even Belize getting some decent rains here today. Again, this is all part of a very broad area of low pressure that's currently spinning over the Central American peninsula. Now, the tropical weather outlook, most of you probably have heard, at least yesterday we had one that we were looking at, and today we're now looking at two. One is over the Caribbean, and we've talked about this since the beginning of the week and the possibility of it moving to the Western Caribbean or maybe even the Bay of Campeche, very similar to the track of where we saw Tropical Storm Alberto early last week. And then we've got another tropical wave that's out in the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean, which is a bit unusual for the latter part of June. Usually you would start to see these vigorous tropical waves with the possibility of development late in July and the early part of August. So let's take a quick look at the Eastern Atlantic here, and the tropical wave or the disturbance that we're looking at is right here in the middle. And this is going to be drifting off toward the west. This was just coming off the African coast yesterday and has made its way there into the east central part of the Atlantic Ocean, and it is forecast to continue to move off toward the west-northwest. And I will show you that some of the models are a little intrigued about this particular tropical wave as it moves on toward the west. So there is a lot of Saharan dust that's out there, and also some dry air. Saharan dust kind of streaming off the African coast and then kind of coming up like this over the west central portion of the, or the east central portion of the Caribbean, and then in the west central portion of the Atlantic. Not all of this is dust. Some of this is just some dry air that's out there. So you got your tropical wave down here that could encounter some of that dust or possibly some of that dry air over the next couple of days. So that would inhibit any development, but some of the models may be going in the opposite direction. So a lot of the folks that are out here in the Leeward and Windward Islands will need to pay close attention to that particular system as it moves off toward the west. So as we go ahead and take a look at the big picture here, you can see that big tropical wave out here. You got another tropical wave right about there, and then a more vigorous tropical wave here over the central part of the Caribbean Sea. And then you got a little bit of a disturbance, I would call it here, breaking off of a cold front there over the west central Atlantic, but it isn't showing any signs of development, and I don't believe the National Hurricane Center is really watching anything there at all, but it is a bit of a low pressure area over the western part of the Atlantic Ocean. The Caribbean, let's go ahead and get right to disturbance 94L, and it's basically a tropical wave right here. Yesterday, it was fairly robust with showers and thunderstorms there over the east central part of the Caribbean. And then on Monday, we were identifying it here out in the Atlantic Ocean. So it's made some decent progress here over the last couple of days, although I will say the thunderstorm activity around this really doesn't look nearly as impressive as it did yesterday, but we'll have to wait and see what happens over the next couple of days. So the official position of disturbance 94L is there north of the Colombian coast and south of that peninsula there off of the Haitian coast and just southwest or southeast rather of Jamaica. So Jamaica there up at the top, and you can see where Haiti is as well. Here's Jamaica, here's Haiti over here, and then Colombia is down here over the South American coast. So the low pressure area is there. So we're going to look at one of our models here, and this is an ensemble model. So it's kind of the same model that runs with different weights to kind of give you a different outcome on here, and that's why there's a lot of similarity, because it's generally just one model. Initially, we do have a track moving off toward the west-northwest, and eventually, maybe in 72 hours, which are the numbers there, we could see it approaching the Yucatan Peninsula, and then as you go into day 4 and day 5, you're talking about the average being over the Bay of Campeche and maybe eastern Mexico and the southern portion of Texas. But if you look at these lines here, this particular model doesn't seem very impressed with this particular. When you get into the yellow lines here and here, you're only talking about pressures that are somewhere between 990 millibars and 1,000 millibars, and that's about as strong as this particular model wants to take it. Just to give you an idea, Tropical Storm Alberto last week, I think, bottomed out at 995 millibars. So if this were to develop into something, it would probably be a minor tropical storm. But as we saw with Alberto, it was a fairly weak tropical storm, and it caused a lot of problems all along the Gulf Coast. Here are some of the intensity models, and what we're looking at on this side here is the wind speeds, and then this axis is time, and the time has been cut off on the bottom. So what we're looking at here is basically day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and day 7 out there. So this is day 7, and you can see that there are some of the models here that actually bring this up to a strong tropical storm, and the ship's model maybe even a Category 1 hurricane, but it's going to be encountering some wind shear and things out here days 1 through 4 to 5, so you're not seeing a lot of intensity there, although the ship's model kind of develops it a little bit earlier here at about day 4 and then really starts to skyrocket. But there is some agreement here that we may see at least some strengthening, but this is just one model that's run, and again, there are several models that is run at this certain time, and most of it keep it as a tropical storm. But I will tell you, some of the other models just don't seem to be too interested in this particular thing. So let's start with the Canadian model, and I will just let you know, Canadian models are a little more overly aggressive when it comes to developing systems, and we're just basically taking a still image of late Saturday, early Sunday. So over the weekend, and you can see that disturbance 94L currently is right here, and then by the time we reach Saturday, the Canadian model has a low pressure area over the Bay of Campeche. Pressure on that 1006, so maybe a tropical depression, at best. But it is at least developing a low there. And then I just, for fun, look out here, you can see that little blob that's there in the Atlantic Ocean. That would be the other disturbance that's now over the eastern Atlantic that we talked about a little bit earlier, and we'll kind of go through that as well. Now the Euro model, again, I'll tell you, this one usually is not as excited to develop tropical systems compared to the Canadian model. But the Euro model still has a bit of a low pressure area there. Again, this is Saturday going into early Sunday. The current disturbance is right about here. So it is a very similar track to what the Canadian model was showing, but it is showing a very weak area of low pressure. And then once again, if you want to look out here, there's maybe a little weak area of low pressure, which could be the other disturbance, which I'm thinking might be 95L come here sometime tomorrow. So let's move along and look at the GFS model. And the GFS model, which is usually more robust on developing tropical systems, just doesn't seem to be interested at all in anything out here over the Bay of Campeche. Perhaps there might be a low pressure area over Central America. Remember, the tropical wave is right about here, and it puts it more on I would say a westward track, but it really is kind of just staying with a big broad area of low pressure that's been kind of sitting here over southern Mexico and the Central American coast over the last couple of days. So the GFS doesn't seem very interested in this particular system, but whoa, check that out. The last several runs have had the GFS develop the other low that's out in the middle part of the Atlantic into a vigorous tropical storm that could possibly work its way here across the Leeward and Windward Islands. So the folks out there need to be watching that as it continues to move off toward the west. This could be impacting the Leeward and Windward Islands sometime during the early part of next week. So you got three models to choose from. The Canadian model showing something in the Bay of Campeche, the Euro model showing something in the Bay of Campeche, but the GFS really doesn't seem to be too interested, and it seems to be focusing more on the Atlantic Ocean instead. So what are some of the things that these two tropical waves will be dealing with? And one of them, not just the Saharan dust and the dry air, but also some shear. So remember our tropical wave, 94L, it's right about here. It's in a high wind shear environment, and there's a high wind shear environment just to the west. Low wind shear right now over the Bay of Campeche, but let's fast forward to Saturday going into Sunday, and you can see that the wind shear really quite strong here. And this is the GFS model, by the way, showing some fairly high wind shear, which is probably why the GFS doesn't want to develop in anything in this area. But the Euro model has fairly high wind shear as well. But just look out here where that other tropical wave was supposed to be by Saturday. Fairly low wind shear environment, but surrounded by wind shear to the west, to the north, and to the east. So if it can roll in tandem and keep in this area of low wind shear, then it might have a chance as it makes its way into portions of the Caribbean, as wind shear is forecast to relax somewhat over the eastern part of the Caribbean as we head into next week. So there really is the potential that we could see one or possibly two named storms here over the next week or so. There are several things that are going in its favor. Of course, we've been talking about the water temperatures. They're in good shape for tropical development just about everywhere you go, and the tropical cyclone heat potential is also quite high, not just here over the western part of the Caribbean, but also out here where that other tropical system wants to try to develop. And the tropical cyclone heat potential is measuring the 80-degree water very deep, not just at the surface. So if you get the deeper waters, you get some high octane fuel, and sometimes systems can work with that. And another thing that is kind of really showing up in the heat potential is what we call the loop current, which is a warmer area of water, kind of an eddy that's over the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, that has been responsible for rapid intensification of a number of tropical storms and hurricanes over the years. And we're going to get to that with a little bit of history here in just a minute. But again, the frequency of tropical systems is still fairly low toward the end of June and getting into the early part of July before really ramping up as we head toward the early part of September, which is the peak of the hurricane season. But I did want to go over a few hurricanes that affected the Gulf of Mexico during the month of July. And these are some in recent memory. Hurricane Cindy, back in 2005, was a Cat 1, made landfall at Grand Isle, crossed over New Orleans earlier, the earliest estimation that this was a tropical storm, but posthumously it gave it the hurricane status, so it was a Category 1. And then just a few days later, Hurricane Dennis made its way into the Gulf of Mexico. Remember that loop current I told you about? Well, it went right over that, and it ramped its way up to a Category 4 hurricane before weakening slightly and making landfall over the Florida Panhandle as a Category 3, and it made landfall just 5 days after Hurricane Cindy hit Louisiana. Another crazy thing is Dennis became the strongest hurricane ever to form before the month of August. Hurricane Emily, meanwhile, said, "Hold my beer," and just 6 days later became the first Category 5 hurricane to ever develop before the month of August. So Dennis held a record for 6 days, and then Emily came along. Emily becoming a Category 5 over the Western Caribbean near Jamaica, crossing over the Yucatan, and then striking South Texas and northern Mexico. Hurricane Dolly was a Category 2, also forming near Jamaica, crossing the Yucatan and heading towards South Texas and northern Mexico. And then in more recent memory, Hurricane Barry that hit South Louisiana as a Category 1 hurricane. Lopsided storm, all of its moisture was on the south side, and the north side of the system, it was generally just winds and clouds. Most of us here in Acadiana, especially north of I-10, were basically unaffected by Hurricane Barry, but down to the south, Iberia and St. Mary Parish, because it was a very slow-moving system, was pounded with Category 1 hurricanes for winds for an extended period of time. Now, there aren't a whole lot of things that offend me when people talk, but when I heard people calling this one Hurricane Barely, for so many times, it really grinded my gears because my mother-in-law lives in New Iberia, and Hurricane Barry rolled a flat roof off the back of her house, just kind of rolled it off, and all of the rain poured down through the ceiling, and she had a tremendous amount of damage, and she was out of her house for about a year and a half. So it was not barely a hurricane, it was definitely Hurricane Barry, and there were people that did suffer from that. So just think about that when you start nicknaming some of these hurricanes out there, that there are real people that are affected by some of these storms, even if they don't affect you. So again, that's just kind of a review of some of the more recent memory hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico during the month of July. So July can be an active month. Well, I really hope you all enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. If you do, please like this video and subscribe to my channel and turn on the notifications. If you got friends on social media that have not heard about Acadiana weather today or Let's Talk Tropics, please let them know. Share it on social media, and please get them to subscribe to my channel as we get deeper into the hurricane season. Of course, we'll be talking about threats that would be coming toward Acadiana, and if we go into full storm mode, we'll be going wall to wall if anything is coming our way that could threaten our region. And again, we're just early in the hurricane season, just getting through June. Hurricane season officially ends on November the 30th. I hope you have a great day today on this Wednesday. Stay cool. It's hot out there, but maybe a few more of you will get a couple of afternoon storms to cool you off. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Hope you have a great day, and I will see you on Acadiana Weather Today tomorrow morning around 7:30.